And right now I want to welcome back to the program KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer, professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa. Had him on the show last week, and now, can you believe it, Chris? Monday night is almost here, and so many things are going to be happening. It's a fluid night, always going to be a surprise, but there's some changes coming too for Democratic caucus goers this year, and you're wondering kind of how all that's going to shake out. So why don't you tell everybody what concerns you the most about maybe making this tally?
Well, I think first of all, just how the results are going to be reported. That's one of the bigger changes, where there are going to be three sets of numbers that are now reported on caucus night. They're going to report that first expression of first preferences, the vote totals there. Then they'll report the expression of final preferences. This is after the realignment period, and then they'll report the state delegate equivalents. And so there are going to be three sets of numbers up on the screen for a lot of for people who are watching the caucus results come in, and those mean very different things. And so that's going to be something that's new. Certainly the use of the satellite caucuses is going to be new, and there are a lot of unique rules there. There are rule changes in terms of if you are in a preference group that is viable in that first alignment period, you have to stay in that group. You cannot realign, and so that's a change. And then as a backup to all of this, the Democratic Party is using preference cards. And so you have to write down, if you're in a viable preference group, you'd write the name of the candidate you're supporting on that card. If you're not viable, you would wait until you're into a viable group to write that card on there, or the name of the candidate on there. And so I think, there are several different rules. I know the Iowa Democratic Party has been doing a lot of training of people who are running their precincts, the precinct chairs, but it's going to be very different.
Yeah, and of course we're talking mainly about the Democratic caucuses on Monday night. There will be Republican caucuses, but as President Trump has no opposition, they'll be mainly just talking about delegate selection to the county convention, kind of the platforms. They'll be in and out about nothing probably. But if you want to learn about your caucuses, though, the Republican Party of Iowa does have a website. You go there and they'll show you where your caucus location. For Democrats, it's really easy. There's a website called iwillvote.com. iwillvote.com. You go to that website. All you have to do is type in your address and your city. Boom. It tells you right where to go. That's pretty interesting. So.
Yeah, and with the Republican caucuses, I think what's interesting here, and my colleague Donna Hoffman has talked about this a lot, is they're still going to presumably hold their straw poll that they typically do.
Great.
What does that mean for President Trump? Does he need to get 90% support? If he doesn't get 95%, does that mean that there's some
Would that send
concern?
A subtle message, yeah.
Right. So I kind of waiting to still see how that shakes out. How they go with those precinct caucuses. But I think that's one thing to watch too.
Yeah, we will be covering, of course, the Republican caucus in this area. We'll be going to one or two of them, I think, but mainly concentrating on the contested race, which of course is on the Democratic side. And you've been observing this the last week and the run-up and the final days. What's your impression? Is there anybody on the move, as we've always seen in the past few years? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I think those top four candidates still seem to be shuffling around a bit in terms of Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Pete Buttigieg. The candidate that you hear a lot of people talking about is that maybe potentially be moving is Senator Amy Klobuchar. Is she moving up to that point where she's going to be viable in a number of precincts? Because again, as we talked about last week, the math becomes really difficult. When you have four candidates who are pulling in that 15 to 20% range,
right,
and you're talking about 15% viability.
There's nothing left over. Yeah.
Right, you have three or four candidates trying to divide up that last 20%. That makes it really difficult. And so I think the Klobuchar campaign, the hope there is that they're building some momentum, particularly in rural parts of the state, certainly the northern parts of the state where since she's a senator from Minnesota.
Well, if you go on social media, the Klobuchar campaign has flooded social media, and that's actually a very smart move because it's cost effective. It doesn't cost anything, just mainly from her events. What did you make of that? There was a report out that the Biden people perhaps tried to make a deal with the Klobuchar people. The Klobuchar people said no deal, that they feel they're strong enough to make it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You wonder how those reports come out and everything.
Both sides, I think, denied it. But
right, of course. I think that's interesting. And to make those kind of deals, and my understanding they were talking about deals on caucus night, where you're talking about moving between preference groups. That comes down to having really good precinct captains within each campaign who know how to do the so-called caucus math that night, who are able to calculate those viability numbers very quickly and understand if you have movement there, what that means for each candidate and what it means for their state delegate equivalent. So I think, that'd be interesting to watch to see how that plays out. But again, I think for Senator Klobuchar, she's looking to rural Iowa and kind of north central Iowa as possible places to make some move.
So, Chris, one of the things for Democrats this year is kind of attracting new supporters that come from maybe the swing voter or the undecided voter, whatever you want to call them, and the centrist, kind of the one right in the middle there, not going one way or the other. So, how do Democrats do that, do you think? How are they working that angle?
Well, yeah, this is kind of a question that's at the core of what Democrats are trying to do this year. Political scientist Alan Abramowitz last week, posted something about that challenge for Democrats. Do they push for a candidate that they agree on based on ideology, or do they push for a candidate based on electability? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And there are different candidates that appeal to different types of voters. In Alan's analysis, he found that the Democratic Party, even in Iowa, is becoming more liberal in terms of likely caucus goers. But you can also see that both people like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are still making gains in Iowa. And so I don't think that's been decided yet among likely caucus goers. And if you look back at the last couple of caucus cycles, what's interesting is just the number of undecided or really the late deciders within the caucus party. I mean, we know that Iowans are notoriously late deciders when it comes to the caucus. And I was looking back at some of the numbers. You can look back at entrance polls for the caucuses. In 2016, there were, at least according to the entrance polls, about 16% of voters made their decision within the last 3 days or even on caucus day. You go back to 2008, though, where you had a number of candidates and it was more competitive between Clinton, Edwards, and Obama. That number was all the way up to 30%. So 30% of likely caucus goers made their decision within the last 3 days. And everything that I've read and the polls that have been coming out this month, I would expect that number to be similar, if not higher, where it seems like a lot of people are just kind of waiting to make that final commitment.
One of the things I find kind of interesting, now Secretary of State Paul Pate is a Republican, but his office has really been pushing to get young people to take part in the caucuses. And I read that now we mentioned this with Jeremy, 238,000 Iowans under the age of 20 or 21 are now registered to caucus. But the question is, will they turn out? That's the key.
That's the key. You can go back to the 2008 caucuses, where the Democratic caucuses, where Barack Obama, there was a lot of enthusiasm among young voters, the thousands of new caucus goers he brought out. I think the entrance polls there showed that 17 to 29-year-old bracket were about 22% of caucus goers that year. In 2016, it dropped back to about 18%. That's a real challenge, but you certainly have to credit Secretary Pate for trying to get young people to participate in the political system, because one thing we know from research is that voting is habitual. Once you do it once, you're more likely to do it again, and that's our number one predictor of whether or not someone's going to vote, is have they done it before. And I think it probably applies to the caucuses as well, where you can look at those entrance polls and again see that people who have caucused, well over half, 50 to 60% are people who've caucused before. So I think that's great if you're trying to get young people involved in the political process that early.
And we know the people who go to the caucus are people who are really passionate about a particular candidate, or at least the party itself. Do you think there's some resentment still from Bernie Sanders supporters that 2016 was rigged against Sanders in favor of Hillary Clinton? And I would suspect that he is going to do real well on Monday night.
Yeah, there seems to be obviously a very core group of supporters for Bernie Sanders. And like we talked about last week, the interesting thing with Senator Sanders is he's an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, but then has to change his party registration in presidential years. And so for some Democrats that may be a turnoff, but for the more liberal part of the party that's willing to vote based on ideology, Bernie Sanders might be more appealing.
Yeah, he's definitely a progressive candidate with, some would say, radical ideas. Some would say socialistic ideas. That name has really come up, that word has come up a lot in this campaign on the Sanders side, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And he's a self-described socialist.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
not afraid of it,
No, he's not at all. And I think, like I said, I think that appeals to a certain portion within the Democratic Party. But again, that gets down to that fundamental question of, do you vote for someone based on ideology, purely on policy preferences, or are you looking further out to electability? And I think that's where Democratic caucus goers are trying to figure out in this last week.
Yeah, I noticed just in the last few days an ad that has popped up on KWWL with some voters saying, I don't think Sanders can beat Trump, or is he the one who can actually win the nomination? So they're trying to plant that seed of doubt already.
Yeah, well, and for Bernie Sanders, it's an interesting setup, because if he would win on Monday night, he's leading in the polls in New Hampshire.
Right, yeah.
And then he'd be up 2-0 really on the rest of the field going into South Carolina and Nevada where he's not polling as well. So that it sets up for a really interesting race if he does well on Monday night going forward.
And then, of course, Super Tuesday right around the corner in California, part of Super Tuesday. That's going to be a very, very big night for all the candidates. So we're going to take a real quick break here. Our programs are online on kwwl.com. We'll come back with Dr. Chris Larimer, KWWL political analyst, who will be with us tomorrow night as well on Monday night for Caucus Night. Chris, looking forward to that as well.
Yeah,
we're going to take a break, come back, and wrap things up here in just a moment. And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steele Report, All Politics, with KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer of UNI joining us here tonight. You know, Chris, social reform, kind of the radical progressive, they find the going tough because change is very tough to make sometimes. Moderates also face challenges because too many people know that change is necessary in a lot of areas. So what's the balance there in trying to attract new, particularly for the Democratic Party, new people to come over and support at least their candidates?
Well, I think it just gets down to how hard the Democratic Party wants to push on some of the things that are part of their core platform. Again, they're trying to get an assessment of the electorate. I mentioned the study by Alan Abramowitz, that he's finding that the proportion of Democratic caucus goers and even Democrats nationally who identify as liberal or very liberal has been increasing. But as we've discussed, that presents challenges in terms of electability. So I think it's always a struggle, and it's a struggle for both parties. How far out to the extremes do you push? Because the primary process or the nominating process sort of forces candidates, as we say, forces them to the tails. But then there's a race back to the center once you get past the nomination. And so I think it's just a constant challenge for the party. And this year it's interesting because you really have two candidates in Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders who are pushing that progressive end of the Democratic Party, and then you have Buttigieg, Biden, and Klobuchar, who are more kind of considered the moderate candidate.
So retail politics is a word that some of the national reporters, cast around here pretty often. Grassroots initiatives, boots on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah.
I kind of look at Iowa caucuses as that one-on-one connection.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's a big deal for Iowans? I mean, the responsibility that goes with the Iowa caucuses?
I do. There's a saying, and I wish I knew where it came from, but that a caucus goer has to shake a candidate's hand 7 times before they'll caucus for him or her. And I think there is some truth to that. I think if you're an activist and you're interested, you do want to see the candidate up close, and you expect to feel some level of comfort with the candidate, some approachability with the candidate. And if you don't get that sense, I think that can potentially be a turnoff. I think, that personal or that qualitative element is really important. We know that caucus goers, even if they're sort of leaning toward one candidate, they're going to go to events for other candidates. So they do continue to shop around, and it takes a while to do that.
Yeah. So some people call Iowa caucuses the Iowa caucuses, where we separate the contenders from the pretenders. And that's really very true. I kind of wish I had thought of that. It wasn't mine. I heard it somewhere else. But do you think this year there are more than 3 tickets out of Iowa?
Potentially. I think that depends on the ordering of on caucus night. Because if you have a situation where Joe Biden comes in 4th, well,
obviously he's still in.
He's still in it, right? And we know he's polling really well in South Carolina, and he's doing well in Nevada. So I do think it depends on how those top 4 shake out. I mean, even though there's some, they're pretty close within the top 4. I think the ordering of that top 4 is going to be extremely important going forward. So I think you could have a case where it's not just the 3 tickets out of Iowa. We mentioned last week, or you mentioned last week, about John McCain finishing 4th in 2008 and still going on to be the nominee. It could be the case this year that someone outside the top 3 goes on to be the nominee for the Democratic Party.
So, Chris, obviously the Tom Steyer supporters, Andrew Yang, likely, don't know for sure, a lot of things can change between now and Monday night, but they'll probably have to realign after that first preference, right?
Well, I mean, that's, for candidates like that, like I said, the hard part is you basically have Steyer, Yang, maybe Amy Klobuchar, and obviously there are other candidates, Tulsi Gabbard, Michael Bloomberg,
John Delaney.
Right, John Delaney and others, who may be fighting to divide up that last 20% at a precinct, and you're looking to get 15 of that 20%. That's a real challenge. And so I think, for those candidates, for their campaigns, I'm sure they're scrambling to make sure that they're viable in at least a certain number of precincts on Monday night.
So the Democratic Party is already predicting perhaps a record turnout. Is that what you're kind of sensing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. You know, they're certainly, from what I've heard, they're looking definitely over 200,000 people. They were right around 180,000 in 2016, but they're looking over 200,000. Some are projecting upwards of the 239,000 mark that
Wow.
they saw in 2008. So yeah, I think we can certainly expect a big turnout Monday night.
All right, Chris, looking forward to being with you here on Monday night. It's
you.
going to be a really fun time.
Yeah.
We hope you will take part, participate in the Iowa caucuses.